One belief that I have held pretty deeply for a pretty long time is that children deserve the right to get hurt on playground equipment. Now, you may assume that the title of this video is being fictitious. It's using hyperbole for effect, but I'm not really being hyperbolic. I'm pretty dead serious. This may be different than the other content on my channel, but I don't want to do completely politics. I want to do a lot of general content, most of which can be rolled into politics. So this is going to include a lot of anecdotes. Some of them are written to be a little sappy, but let's go forward. To set the stage, there's sort of a war going on America's playgrounds. You might not be aware of it if you don't have any kids that are in school, or it's been a very long time since you were in elementary school. If you're over the age of like 40, playgrounds don't look exactly the way that they did when you were a kid. There are not very many metal slides, seesaws, even roundabouts, and that sort of stuff. Any of the classic playground equipment. To comply with rules and regulations, the dirt is replaced with mulch or padding, and the wood and metal is replaced by plastic. Plastic, by the way, is a building material that I'd loathe even if it wasn't synonymous with artificial. In every school, the older children recount stories about how awesome the playground used to be before that one kid's stupid parents complained. So I'm showing on the screen what playgrounds used to look like, and now I'm going to show is how they look like now. Speaking as a former young child, these are more photogenic than fun. And as a young child, I identified a phenomenon where the kids, seemingly ironically, would act more reckless and engage in more risky play on more padded and sanitized play equipment. There's a compensation effect where the supposedly safer equipment makes it look like you don't have to make an effort to be careful. If you were young, which of these two playground environments would make you try harder to be careful? This one or this one? Additionally, children will go to riskier and rowdier lengths to desperately try to extract entertainment from equipment that does not lend itself to fun. After all, what is fun but the sensation of risk? This comes down to an evolutionary psychology conception of play wherein the purpose of play is to simulate pseudo-risky behaviors so that you become more accustomed to them and are thus more prepared for the challenges that you may encounter in your actual life. What is play, then, but practice in engaging with that sensation of risk? The play as practice idea makes sense from this framework, and this is why even animals will engage in play fighting. Meanwhile, school administrators are creating increasingly ridiculous, draconian, and overprotective rules. In some schools, tag breaks two common rules, the rule against running and the rule against physical contact. They are dangerous and inappropriate, and some schools even ban the concept of friends for being exclusionary. I'm not making this up. A key concept in this argument, I may have mentioned it before, I may have talked about it before, is the concept of antifragility. Just as the opposite of top is not middle, it's bottom, the opposite of fragile is not robust or resilient. So anti-fragile doesn't mean that you're robust. It does not mean that you're impervious to adversity. Instead, something is anti-fragile if and only if it benefits from adversity, if it benefits from rare or potentially risky events. For example, a muscle is the prime example of something that's anti-fragile, where if you harm a muscle, then it grows stronger the more you damage it. And another example of something anti-fragile is children. Children, as developing organisms, are anti-fragile in that the more they are exposed to a small amount of risk, the more they grow resilient. So the best way to teach someone is not merely to explain how to do things. It is to actively and repeatedly let them attempt to do things, and then fail, and then assess their failure, and then persist. And this is how you nurture mental and physical toughness. One of the elementary schools that I attended, its playground had multiple dedicated full-time monitors. This was psychotic. These were people whose full-time job was to supervise and patrol my school's playground with literally loudspeakers, yelling at kids to be safe. And you had better not run into one when you were playing. Even if you were playing completely safe, they would find something to yell at you about, because that was their whole job. They would also steal a good chunk of your time at the end of recess to line everyone up and count them and tell them to be quiet, but that's a bit of a tangent. I recall one day when I was bored and playing by myself. I decided that the plastic of the slide was not slippery enough for it to be used as an actual slide, and it would be more fun to just climb the slide. I thought my 8-year-old self clever as I scaled it, but one of the playground safety monitors pulled me over. She asked my full name and my teacher's name, and the next morning a woman spoke over the loudspeaker to tell everyone in the school not to climb the slide. I can't believe they actually announced that to the whole school. So imagine if she had instead let me try to climb the slide, and then if I did so poorly, I would have just fallen. And to clarify about this slide, it was one of those ones that was round, it goes all the way around. It's hard to describe, but it wasn't going to pose a safety hazard to anyone other than myself. And if I did fall, I would not have hurt, I would have fallen like 3 feet into mulch. It wouldn't have hurt a lot, or I wouldn't have gotten injured, but it probably would have hurt a little bit, just to tell me, oh, don't try that again. So falling from the slide could have taught me the dangers of climbing the slide by experiment, which is really the best way to learn, to have people experiment. Fortunately, a few weeks later, I found myself with access to less supervised playground equipment, and I climbed it a little bit recklessly, and then I fell a few feet and bumped my head on the playground. And I wasn't injured, I was just a bit shaken, but I learned how not to climb the equipment, a lesson that the playground monitor denied me. It showed me that by my own intuition, not by dictum. If you haven't caught on yet, the concept of the playground monitor also serves as an allegory for quite a few things. But you see, a playground that creates scrapes and bruises is valuable. It teaches kids how to deal with scrapes and bruises, and most importantly, to be resilient. And what better place to teach this? What better place to teach kids than the controlled environment of a playground? I'm not talking about life-changing injuries here, only a rejection of safety theater. So who do you think will be more safe as an adult? The person who was coddled as a child, or the person who was allowed to fail? It's obvious. So making playgrounds safe doesn't avoid risk, it just delays it. So about a year after the events of the last story, my mom let me loose on a giant pirate ship replica playground. And that thing was awesome. And you can tell that a lot of love and effort was put into its creation. And I bounced off its walls, and 10 minutes later, what do you know, I had a dozen giant splinters all over my hands and arms, and my mom helped me remove them. Did she then campaign to have the playset removed? Well, I hope not. I learned, I guess, to be more careful to avoid splinters. And I would have been more careful in the first place if I hadn't become more used to the artificially safe variety of playgrounds, perhaps. Now, there are two mental models that are useful for understanding this issue. The first one is the dictatorship of a small minority, which, if you want to learn about that, I won't talk about it, just go watch my most recent video before this one. The second is the identifiable victim effect, and this is the concept that if you have one single victim that is strongly hurt by something, then it is much easier to identify with that victim than it is to identify with the general feeling of dispersed impact where the benefit of it is not obvious, at least in the short term. And the effect of this is you have the problem of when parents campaign to have the playgrounds be made safer, it's very hard to fight against that because you're fighting against these two forces which seem to be the main forces driving society at this point. We have the force where, on one hand, you have the dictatorship of the minority, that one parent that wants to see things change, the other parents don't really know what's going on. The second is you have that one kid that got seriously hurt on the playground, not seriously hurt, but noticeably hurt, as opposed to the many kids who got stronger and more resilient getting a little bit hurt, not being coddled, right? So the vast majority of parents don't care about the playgrounds, but it only takes one parent, and it may seem foolish to replace a whole playset, cost a bunch of money, just to appease that 1% that lacks the foresight and complains that their kid gets hurt. However, it is currently more practical for a school to simply give in, rather than risk the legal claim that if something does go wrong, you heard the complaints and did nothing. And even as a really young child, I noticed among overprotective Americans an aversion to wood, strangely enough, in the playgrounds. I remember recounted an event where a kid picked up a twig, and then a teacher walked by and told the kid to put the twig in the garbage can because, I guess, sticks are dangerous. Because you can poke your eye out, but it was just a twig. And you can't make this shit up. To be honest, I kind of feel bad for the kids who are not allowed to play with sticks as little kids. Because when I was a little kid, I played with sticks constantly. I had all these battles with other kids in my neighborhood, play with sticks, pretend we were, sword fighters. It probably wasn't that safe. I mean, we could have, stabbed each other in the eye, whatever. But I feel bad for the kids who were not allowed to do that. And I never got injured. I never got stabbed in the eye. I never went blind. And some of the most fun that I had as a kid was playing with sticks. So I resolved as a litmus test for my future wife, way back then, will she allow my potential children to play with sticks, to climb trees? Because kids nowadays, not to sound like a boomer, they're not even allowed to climb trees. And even if they are, they don't seem to want to climb trees because they spend all the time indoors. And this is kind of sad. And the aforementioned problem with wood, compellingly, Japanese playgrounds, for example, they do not have this problem. Japanese playgrounds all look like what I'm about to show in this image here. And are the Japanese facing an epidemic of mass playground injuries? Well, obviously not. But what you do have in Japan is a lack of crybaby social activists. And more generally, the Japanese have a different parental philosophy than Americans, significantly with regard to unsupervised time. Japanese children walk to school every day. Heck, some children in Japan, the equivalent of fourth graders, I might add, take this train to school every day. Meanwhile, American parents can get accused of child abuse for so much as letting their kids walk to the bus stop unattended. And I worry about this effect of constant supervision, probably paranoia that their kids are going to get abducted, which is totally ridiculous. It inculcates a slave mentality where there is no self-determination, and even the most trivial of your affairs are overseen by an authority figure. Obsessive, compulsive vigilance is suffocating and breeds dependence. And I wonder, does this affect the political views of a generation that is trained to scream for authorities rather than fight their own battles? And this is a topic that sociologist Jonah Haidt covers in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind.
American parenting really changed in the 1990s. When I'm talking about the book, I go around the country, I ask audiences, at what age were you let out? At what age could you go outside and play with your friends with no adult supervising? And I say, only people over 40. What's your answer? Call it out. And it's 5, 7, 8, 6, 5, 7. It's always 5 to 8. That's what we always did. Between 5 and 8, kids could go outside without an adult. They'd get in arguments, they would play games, they would make rules. They were independent. They got years and years of practicing independence. Then I say, just people under 25. What year were you let out? 12, 14, 13, 16. Nobody says 10 or younger. In the 1990s, as the crime rate was plummeting, as American life was getting safer and safer, Americans freaked out and thought that if they take their eyes off their children, the children will be abducted. Now this goes back, the fear was stoked by cable TV in the 1980s. There were a few high-profile abductions. But it's not until the 1990s that we really start locking kids up and saying, you cannot be outside until you're 14 or 15. We took this essential period of childhood from about 8 to 12, when kids throughout history have practiced independence, have gotten into adventures, have made rafts and floated down the Mississippi River. We took that period and said, you don't get to practice independence until it's too late, until that period is over. Now, a couple years before you go to college, now you can go outside. Oh, okay, go off to college. And a lot of them are not ready. They're just not used to being independent. When they get to college, they need more help. They're asking adults for more help. Protect me from this. Punish him for saying that. Protect me from that book. There's a very sharp change with kids who were born in 1995 and afterwards, surprisingly sharp. Jean Twenge, in her book iGen, analyzes surveys of behavior, of time use. And beginning with kids born in 1995, they spend a lot less time going out with friends. They don't get a driver's license as often. They don't drink as much. They don't go out on dates. They don't work for money as much. What are they doing? They're spending a lot more time sitting on their beds with their devices, interacting that way. These are the first kids who got social media when they were 13, roughly. They were subjected to much more anti-bullying content in their schools, much more adult supervision. They were raised in the years after 9/11. They were given much less recess and free play with No Child Left Behind. There was much more testing pushed down into earlier grades. We don't know if this is for sure the reason, but they seem to have more difficulty working out problems on their own. Everybody is desperately trying to get prestige by either showing what a victim they are or by punishing people who they think have harmed victims by getting the administration to come in. So everybody is pitching to the powers that be to come in. Where did this come from? In the 80s and 90s, America changed its parenting. Kids lost unsupervised time. Kids used to have a lot of unsupervised time. You get into fights, you work it out. But because of the fear of child abduction, because of the anti-bullying policies, American child rearing changed so that there's always an adult, and the adult always solves the problems. And the whole point is you want to state your case to get the adult to punish him, and not to let him get the adult to punish me. And so kids haven't had the chance to learn to deal with insults, to learn to be excluded. I mean, we all get excluded, and you learn to deal with it.
For a subset of a new generation, sensitivity is not a pejorative, but the highest of virtues. When I say someone is sensitive, I mean that negatively. They're sensitive. But now we have stuff like sensitivity training or sensitivity readers. It's like, is this word no longer a slur? It's actually a virtue, and they virtue signal by exaggerating their offense taking. They're not rebellious young people like there used to be rebellious young people, but rather they demand speech codes. And I'm not going to go off too much about this because if you're watching this, you probably know all about this. You know all about this culture war that's going on. You can't be living as a, teenager to 20-something online today and not be plugged into the culture war in some capacity. I mean, you know that there's a culture war going on. And I'm not saying this is the cause of it. I think that talking about how people are raised is a perhaps under-discussed influencer of the culture. I believe this represents a not completely inconsequential cultural change, a change to asking third parties, asking authority figures to resolve disputes. And meanwhile, the boomers are complaining that the kids are cooped up in their rooms getting fat playing video games. But they were not inculcated with those skills in their formative years. But to make matters worse, nobody wants to play in an infantilized playground. Playground safety is part of this problem, in line with the reduction in unsupervised time. And don't even get me started on anti-bullying initiatives. And if this video were limited to playgrounds, I don't know if I would make a video about it. The main problem is one of a paranoid, neurotic, and obsessive type of person trying to baby-proof the world, and others buying into the illusion that they create. There's a general epidemic where this kind of person tries to scrub the world of impurities to make everything safe and inoffensive. And the end result of this is that we'll add protective padding to every edge of our newly sterile and sanitized world until everyone is just out of touch.